Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend history story. This week is another video, number 11, in the series of Tales from the Past covering mostly everyday stories of everyday people who lived in Wallsend in past times. Some of the stories may be longer than others, and they all come from various different years, but they aren't in any particular order. I hope you will enjoy it and find it interesting. In 1887, the annual flower show of Wallsend was opened in what was described as a field close to Wallsend railway station. It was said that this year there had been less entries than in the past, but this was compensated by the very good displays of flowers, fruit and vegetables. And of course, in the 1800s and the early 1900s, there were a lot more allotments in Wallsend, so there was much more opportunity for people to grow fruit, flowers and vegetables. Mr. Brown of Wallsend won a first prize for his marrow, which I have to say is one of the few vegetables that I really don't like. And he also won for his fuchsia, which it was noted had been grown on the windowsill in his home. Mr. Green of Wallsend also won first prize for his petunias. A lot of the other winners were from outside of Wallsend, and these annual flower shows were open to anybody to enter, so you didn't always have just people from Wallsend winning the prizes. The article went on to say that the event had not been attended very well during the day, but it was felt that this was down to the majority of Wallsend being at work at the time, as the event was held during the week and it actually started on a Tuesday. However, the night time had seen a huge turnout, and there had been a band from Heaven entertaining the crowds, and they had been dancing in one of the larger marquees. A later flower show held in 1891 managed to get a much larger write-up in the papers, and this was due to it being held in somewhat terrible weather in September. It was held at the cycle ground in Wallsend, which was located just behind what is now the Lindisfarne Club and where the new houses have been built. And at the time it would have been quite an open space with no protection from bad weather, and this no doubt would have caused many problems for the organisers trying to keep the marquees in place and not having them all blown away. The newspaper stated that the wind was blowing a gale and threatening to blow down the large marquee that was to be used for the flower, fruit and vegetable displays. And already earlier that day, a second marquee set aside for the entertainment that evening had already been blown down and had to be removed, and some of the smaller marquees had been badly damaged, some of which the article said were just bits of material attached to the remaining poles blowing in the wind. And this had resulted in the displays of flowers etc. being difficult for the judges to view, as many had been placed in corners of the marquee in the hope that the wind would not damage them, and they were most definitely not looking their best. However, this did not stop several Wallsenders from winning first prizes for things such as pansies, which was Mr. F. Carr, and begonias, geraniums and roses. And other first prizes were awarded for things like beetroots. It actually said 2 beetroots, 2 turnips and leeks. The article did not state if the nighttime dancing went ahead after the bad weather, but it did say that music was provided at the 3-day event by local brass bands. So just like the band on the Titanic, no matter what was happening, the band played on. Flower and vegetable shows were very popular in the past and were usually held in more open public spaces, not like the later shows that most of us would remember, which were held in the likes of the Memorial Hall or in clubs and pubs of the area. But these later shows were also popular, and I do wonder how many of you listening to this took part in them or went along to view the displays. In 1913, 3 Wallsend men found themselves in court on a charge of having taken matches into G-Pit. The men were James Sowerby, Andrew Webdale and Lawson Johnson. The colliery workers would know, of course, that taking matches underground was not only a dangerous thing to do, but also not allowed, and on most occasions they would be searched before starting their shifts. And it was stated that James had been found with 1 match in his waistcoat pocket, Andrew had been found with 4 matches in his coat pocket, and Lawson had been found with 1 match in his coat pocket. All 3 men had been questioned as to why the matches were there. James had stated that he had been very surprised when the match had been found in his pocket, as he did not know it was there. And Andrew said he had just recently bought his coat and had been wearing it for the first time, and was also unaware of the matches in his pocket. Lawson said that he had changed from his usual coat to another, and he had actually forgotten to check the pockets. And although their defence was somewhat believable, the magistrates did not let any of them off, and all 3 men were fined 10 shillings and 7 shillings costs. I did find a story from 1927 to be quite sad. 2 unnamed brothers, who were only 11 and 12 years old, were sent to court for having stolen 4 bottles of milk from a shop on Wallsend High Street. The article seemed to suggest that these 2 brothers were homeless, as it was said they hoped to find them a place in a children's home. It seemed to me that they were perhaps only looking for something to drink and were most likely cold and hungry. The courts, however, always took a stern view of anyone caught stealing, and children were no different. Both boys were committed to the Wesley Nautical Industrial School for 4 years for the 12-year-old and 5 years for the 11-year-old. This was, of course, the ship based at North Shields, which was still in use at the time. To me, it seems quite a harsh sentence for items that were only valued at 1 shilling and 3 pence at the time. But I assumed they hoped that the training at the school would lead them on to a better life. But sadly, as neither of the boys were named, there is no way to know if they did end up with a trade and a better life. When talking of harsh sentences, a couple of other examples would be one from 1891 and another from 1904. In 1891, a man who we will simply call John, who was 19 years old and a baker from Wallsend, was arrested on 2 charges. One for stealing a top coat, a suit, a hat and some braces, all valued at £5 11 shillings and the property of Mr. Ritson of Wallsend, and also for stealing a pair of boots belonging to Mr. Irwin, valued at 5 shillings. John pleaded guilty to the crimes and was sentenced to 6 months in prison with hard labour. My first thought on this story was that it appeared John was stealing an outfit to wear for his own use. However, it turns out he had sold the items and used the money to buy himself a watch and chain, which had been found in his possession when he was arrested. And the magistrates said that as Mr. Ritson had lost all of his property, the watch should be given to him in compensation for his lost goods. The second example that I mentioned from 1904 was another man by the name of John, not the same man as in the previous story. John, in this case, was 20 years old and worked as a miner, and he had taken a fancy to 3 watches owned by Mr. Appleby of Wallsend. No value of the items was given, but one watch was 9-carat gold, so no doubt quite expensive. And this resulted in John being sentenced to 12 months in prison with hard labour. His sentence was based, the magistrate stated, on the fact that this was not his first offence. Hard labour, for anyone interested, may not have just been simply sewing mailbags or making rope. It could have included things like breaking rocks or moving piles of soil from one location to another, and some of these tasks had no real purpose. They were simply designed to tire the prisoner out and make them easier to manage, and also, they hoped, less likely to offend again after knowing what kind of punishment they may receive. However, based on the number of people who were sent to prison several times, it doesn't seem to have worked. The last story this week is about a storm that happened in Wallsend in 1935. Although it was apparently a lovely sunny day, a freak lightning flash struck 3 shops and the flats above on Wallsend High Street. It was said that those walking along the high street at the time scattered in all directions as tons of bricks crashed down to the ground. Luckily, no one was hurt. and it was even claimed that some of the neighbouring properties were felt to shake as the lightning struck the other buildings. One of the luckiest families to escape unhurt were those who were sitting in the kitchen of one of the flats above the shops. They were sat around the kitchen fire when the lightning flash shot down the chimney, passed between them all, and set fire to the curtains on the other side of the room. It must have been terrifying, and it certainly hasn't made me feel any happier about thunder and lightning. I still don't like it, and I think after this I hate it even more. No details were given as to the cost of the damage caused, but no doubt it would have not been cheap to replace all the chimneys and other brickwork that had been damaged, and some of the shops may have had to close for several days. And although things like this were quite rare, this is not the only account of damage due to thunder or windstorms in the area in the past, some of which resulted in windows of homes being blown out. Thankfully these days, I hope, windows are a little tougher and don't get blown out as easily as the old sash ones might have done. I do hope that you have found these short little stories interesting. They really are just a glimpse into the past and some of the more simple things that happened to everyday people in Wallsend. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.